Hey, it's Adya Pujari, and you're listening to Bloom in the Room, the place to be to learn more about mental health and everything related to it. For today's show, we have with us Prachi Vesh. Prachi Vesh is a licensed clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, and a certified clinical trauma specialist. She founded India's first online psychotherapy website, Hope Network, in 2009, which gave way to the emotional wellness initiatives in 2020. Prachi has contributed hundreds of expert articles to platforms such as Femina, Child, Better Homes and Gardens, and Tweak India. Her specialties are relationships and dating, premarital coaching, couples therapy, and recovery from emotional trauma of abuse. Today's topic for the podcast is attachment styles and toxic relationships. Let's dive straight into it. Hey Prachi, how are you today?
Hi Adya, I'm very well. How are you?
I am doing good. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today, and especially since we're talking about relationship and toxicity. So it's a topic that I think all our listeners have it really close to their hearts. So it's something very interesting that they'll learn today.
Yeah, I'm also really looking forward to talking to you. I think you're doing some very good work with recording the episodes that you are doing and the subjects that you're coming up. So I think we're going to have a good conversation today.
Absolutely, I'm totally looking forward to that. So, Prachi, would you let us know what different attachment styles are and how are they related to healthy relationships?
Um, I'm glad you asked that because I think attachment styles are fundamental to how we relate to other people in life, not just romantic partners, but other connections that we make in life. And attachment styles are basically ways of connecting with people that we pick up from our early life experiences, how we learn how to respond to other people, and how to also ask them for connection when we are looking for affection or a response from them. And these become pretty stable in life. They become very almost like unconscious or subconscious patterns of response that we have to people. Different attachment styles. I mean, of course, ideally the most healthy one would be a secure attachment style, being where somebody is very clear on their sense of self and their partner's sense of self, and also able to set healthy boundaries, recognize what's healthy for the relationship and what's not, communicate transparently, talk about things in an open way, and also whenever they are craving attention or affection they can ask for it also in a very healthy open kind of a way without using any passive aggressive gestures or without feeling extremely vulnerable. So that's the secure attachment style. Then you have an anxious attachment. Uh, you can have anxious disorganized, which is the person is usually all over the place with their affections, hot and cold, how you call it in a regular language. They would not know when to respond how, or sometimes they'll be like really clingy and sometimes they'll be very very distant, and it just goes up and down in a roller coaster. Then you have anxious avoidant, where these people are scared of intimacy. So the moment the relationship starts to deepen, they start to withdraw and they start to get distant from their partner more. And then the partner gets confused because they wonder what they are doing wrong to turn this person away. But actually, what's happening is that the intimacy is scaring this person because somewhere in the past they have learned that if you get intimate, it makes you vulnerable and then you are open to getting hurt also. So yeah, these are the primary attachment styles that come into play in a lot of relationships.
Right, and that is quite well put. I mean, you did explain it really well. I mean, I was also, while you were speaking, thinking about which attachment style do I have and where do I stand in that, and
Yeah.
what I can really do. So, when we talk about attachment styles, do they change over time? Let's say I have a certain attachment style right now. So, over time,
Mhm.
with my experiences or the way that I meet people or interact with, or probably I'm just growing as a person, so I learn from my mistakes, etc. Or maybe I have bad experiences, which kind of makes me shut towards having new relationships. So, does
Mhm.
that affect my? I mean, of course, it affects my personality, but does it affect my attachment style? So, can people change their attachment styles over time? Would be something that I'm curious about.
That's I'm glad you asked that because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this and thinking about how to make their relationship better. While attachment styles are fairly stable patterns of behavior, but if they are unhealthy and if they are being maladaptive to your relationship, and once you become aware of it, yes, it is possible to learn healthier ways of responding. So, by way of that, yes, you can probably say that you can change your attachment style, but for that, you have to proceed. I mean, you have to do really deep work. You have to understand first, become aware of what your attachment style is, where is it coming from, what are your typical ways of responding, and only then will you be able to learn how to change that. It's like, if you buy a car, if you and you want to learn to fix it, then you have to first understand the mechanics of it. You have to understand how the car is built, and then you'll be able to tinker around with it. So yes, it's possible to change it. It's possible to learn healthier ways of responding. Sometimes it can work when only one partner works on themselves. Usually it works amazingly well if both people work together on it.
Right. But when we talk about, let's say somebody being, I mean, attraction, be it sexual or mental, being a person being attracted to somebody, at that point, let's say, we talk about girls being attracted to a certain type. Let's say they talk about being attracted to bad boys. So
Mhm.
I mean, is there inherently something wrong with this feeling, or does this change over time? Because here there is, I mean, it's not one person that they're working with. It's mainly themselves that they're working with, and how they I mean, are attracted to an individual. So how does that work?
So attraction is actually dependent on a lot of factors. First, I want to mention that attraction can be pure chemistry also. And chemistry is very different from compatibility. You can have chemistry with a lot of people based on your physical pheromones, on your just looks, or somehow just the way they talk, or where they are in their career, the way they walk, the way they make you feel, all of that. Like anything, any of these things can generate amazing chemistry, but chemistry is not compatibility. So chemistry is basically what you normally know as attraction. Yes, certain amount of chemistry is required for anyone to explore whether there is compatibility or not. But if it's pure attraction, like you were talking about the bad boys thing, a lot of times the people we get attracted to on a chemistry level happens because they trigger some subconscious part of us, which how do I say this? Like they are who we want to be somewhere. So
Mm-hmm.
if somebody is getting really attracted to bad boys, for example, there is something that inside her that wants to rebel, maybe something that feels suppressed, something that feels like it needs to break free, and this fellow seems like the way out. This fellow seems like her way of living that desire of hers. But obviously, again, these are things that happen on a very, very subconscious level, and not necessarily everything you're attracted to is going to be healthy for you. We all love junk food, but then is it healthy for us? It's not. So you can't have junk food every day, 3 meals a day, no matter how good it tastes or how attracted you are to it. So to have balance in a relationship, to have a healthy relationship, you're going to have it with someone who can provide you stability, who may on typical terms sound boring for that matter, but this whole idea of passion and attraction has been so distorted by everything that we read and see around us and all of that, that we have started to mistake emotional roller coasters for passion, but they aren't.
Right. And I can not relate more to this because we see, I also, especially Netflix these days, something that everybody has binged watched during the pandemic, right? Being at home, Netflix, or let's say Prime, etc. And most of the shows that are on the top 10 list or the top 5 list are all about either sexual attraction between two people, or somehow it has such content which is mistaken for true love, or somebody caring for you. Whereas I personally found it very offensive, a lot of things, because there is no role of one of the individual over there, or they're completely dominated by the other. There is no nurturing shown in the relationship. It's all about dominance, or somehow showing how rebellious they are. There is, I mean, it doesn't really work that way in real life, right? Because you're sharing your space with the other person. You can, nobody is perfect, however perfect they might depict them in social media or in movies or in the books that we read. A normal human being will always have flaws, right? And that's what we learn to love about them, that okay, fine, they might have flaws, but they do so much for us. So I think that is a I think it should be an eye opener for many people who also get influenced, because I think on a personal level also our ideas come from watching these films and our environment. And I think we should talk about the scenario in India, with our entire Indian culture focused so much on the ideas of relationships being so dominated by one person or family. So what would be your opinion on that, since we're, I mean, you're a person who's working in India and managing relationships, and especially working with women who were in toxic relationships? How has that been for you?
It has been a very heartbreaking experience for me, honestly, because you see so much of toxic behavior normalized in this culture, and patriarchy is so deep seated, so deeply conditioned that so many times it just comes across as a care gesture. It's not seen as controlling. Just today, I was discussing with someone. There's this client of mine whose boyfriend says that if if I want to tell her things to make her a better person, how's that controlling? Isn't that care? And then I'm telling him that okay, but how do you get to decide that she becomes a better person by doing these things? Because these are things you want her to do. And in his opinion, these better things are not posting certain revealing photos on Instagram, or not being too feminist about her thoughts, about her views, or dressing a certain way when she goes to meet her parents, or how much she can meet her friends, how much she can go clubbing and pubbing and alcohol and things like that. So in his mind, what he's doing is making her a better person. And he genuinely was very, very confused. He said, how is this controlling? I'm just helping her become a better person. And I said, no, you don't get to decide that. She gets to decide that. And then I asked him, I said, okay, fine, let's take this like this for a moment. And how many things has she told you that you need to change to become a better person? And he said, I'm already a good person. I don't need to change. So why will she point something out to me? And I said, see, this is what it is. Like, she accepts you for who you are, but you don't. You think that she needs to be a certain way for you to accept her, for her to become this image that you have in your mind. And this is what happens so often, because I see this pattern where men from conservative backgrounds, or see, nothing wrong with that. You have a value system, you have a value system, that's fine. But men coming from conservative or orthodox backgrounds have maybe stepped out of their homes, made careers for themselves in bigger cities, in cosmopolitan environments, and they are falling for women who are independent thinkers, who are bold, who like to make their own decisions and all of that. But the moment the switch is flipped to her getting married to him, then all these things suddenly start to come up, right? Like just yesterday, one of my friends was telling me that she's just got out of a about to happen marriage. She called it off just before it happened. And she said that the day their roka ceremony that happens, right? So the day it happened, the very next day he tells her that, oh, just yesterday we've had a roka. Why don't you start wearing suits now? And she said, why? You've loved me for 10 years for what I wear, and what is this supposed to mean? So yeah, it's so deep seated. And if you look at it from their point of view, they are just trying to say that oh, it's a normal natural transition because now you're going to be a married woman, and then there are certain things that you have to do. But how is that supposed to change her individuality? You loved her for what she was. Now why do you want to change her? So this is so apparent. And talking about toxic behaviors being normalized, things like body shaming, like simple body shaming, like constantly telling her that she needs to lose weight, oh, because it's for your own good. I want you to be healthy, so why don't you try and exercise, why don't you shut up? Who are you to decide that? She is a thinking, functioning, intelligent human being. She can think for herself. But the basic issue with the culture is that nobody understands that women have autonomy of thought. Women can think for themselves. They don't need men to think for them.
I think that is so well said, because especially the point where you say that a a woman is told to change the moment we step into marriage. Maybe every guy is comfortable while they are dating, but the moment it comes to meeting their family, so many things change. Like probably they don't even talk about for 10 years. Probably they never even spoke about who which surname they are gonna take up or what clothes she's gonna wear, how she's gonna present herself. And I personally know so many people around me, not just clients, people I grew up with, who are stepping into marriage or who have stepped into marriage so early. The way they dress, from the way they talk, and especially when in-laws come, like some people I know, they stay away, like they stay as a couple together, they are not staying with the joint family. So when the family does come to visit, the woman for the entire month or 2 months, she's constantly wearing saris at home, which she's not at all comfortable in. And it's something that is so in depth that even when she has to go out to work, she's going out in that sari, changing at the office, and then coming back home and changing again. And not once with the husband or the family try to understand what is there. And in a way, some people might be comfortable. I mean, it's not necessary that I mean, I also don't believe that it's necessary that we need to tell everything to the in-laws. If she's comfortable doing that, that's fine. But I think couples should be able to talk about these things before stepping into marriage, so that they feel more comfortable, both of them are comfortable, and it doesn't come as a huge shock to somebody. That because I'm sure, like, if all of these things are put on me just suddenly out of the blue, and I've not even agreed upon it, now I just have to stick with it, right? Because now I'm married, now I have to do these things, I don't have a way out. It seems like a lot to take in, and then I think a certain amount of pressure and frustration builds in, which is obviously shown in the relationship as well. So I think that is also there. So also coming to the fact that relationships are not just based on nowadays we talk about the LGBTQTI community also. So do the attachment styles, like I had a lot of people asking me this thing that, as therapists, we have different therapists for that community also, which is fine. But my thing was, do attachment styles remain the same over there also? Because we talk about different genders and we barely know anything about it, how much ever we read right now, because there's so much to know about that community and so much to learn. So because we are talking about this, I thought that we should also know that if attachment styles and the issues that we face in the normal stereotypical relationships, is that the same when we talk about those communities?
Yes, primarily yes, because when attachment styles are formed, they are formed very, very early in life, probably prior to maybe 3 years of age. So, anyway, at that time, a person is not very cognizant of their gender identity. So the experience of building the attachment style is primarily based on the connection that they have with their primary caregivers, whether it is parents or someone else. So yes, the attachment issues stay the same. Self-image can differ from community to community, because then the sense of self starts to form once you are exposed to other people's expectations of you or other people's treatment of you that way. And then that starts to blossom around your preteens and things like that. So obviously by that time you have started to get a little sense of your gender, and obviously you are also treated according to the gender that people around you are comfortable with, right? So then the self image can differ from community to community, but yes, the attachment style patterns more or less stays the same because it is acquired much much earlier in life.
Right, and that is true. But since you said that attachment styles are formed very early, let's say at the age of 2 or 3, because we look at the primary caregiver, be it parents or anybody around us, the basic environment that we're in at that point. So uh, is it possible that our caregiver and we share that same attachment style? Because at the end of the day, I think we as kids learn from role modeling and what kind of treatment that we get. So does attachment style, can that be similar? And if so, can they do something about changing the way they bring up a child so that they have healthy attachment styles? That would also be a question that I'm interested in. Like, how can we ensure that the person that we are bringing up or we are nurturing, or if I am around somebody, what possibly can I do to ensure that they have a healthy attachment style?
That's a very insightful question. And yes, attachment styles can be, for lack of a better word, transferred. Because let's say you have a parent who is anxious, disorganized in their pattern. So obviously, this is going to extend to the child as well. The parent's response to the child is going to be erratic, hot and cold again. So the child will also learn the same response pattern. Uh, Child will probably learn how to watch out for the parents mood all the time and respond accordingly. Such children grow up really fast because they develop this tendency to read the room, so to say, to understand people's expressions and then modify their responses accordingly. When these children grow up, they are actually mistaken for people who are very empathetic, but actually this is a trauma response. This is something that they pick up very early in life, for survival, that you have to be able to read other people's moods to be able to ensure safety for yourself. So empathy is something very, very different, and but then largely in common parlance, they come to be known as empathetic. So yes, that is how attachment style can transfer from the parent to the child, because the parent will raise the child based on the same attachment pattern. Sometimes it can trigger an opposing attachment style in the child, because the child will respond to something which is coming at the child, and the child will act in defense, so it can be opposing also. But yes, what the child will develop will depend a lot on the parent's attachment style. And for the second part of your question as to what they can do to nurture better, again, awareness is key. uh, Even if you're not exactly facing any problems in parenting, it is always a good idea that before you become parents, to get some awareness into who you are as a person, so that you don't end up transferring your fears, anxieties, mental blocks, any of those things to your child. So that's like a great way to go about it. Hardly anyone does it though. But then yes, that's like an ideal way to go about it. If not, then if you find yourself responding in ways that your parents treated you like, then it's time to become aware of it, identify it, and then do something about it, because probably you are now doing to your child what your parents did to you, or you may be trying to do exactly the opposite, which also may not be very healthy in this situation. You have to find a balance. So for that, again, self awareness is key.
When you mentioned the fact that it's a trauma response, I think that is very, very. It's so deep seated that because when we talk about fears and phobias, a child is not even scared of a snake. They'll probably just end up holding it. That's also what we learn in Psychology 101, right? The child doesn't is free of fears. They see the parent reacting to a cockroach or anything in the house that's there, and that's how they learn that, oh, this is something that I need to fear. And the same thing I see with so many children, that who are scared of animals, like let's say even a dog, though we see dogs all the time and we see them as pets, and that's not something to be threatened about. But since the parents are also, and I've always found this, that the child is scared usually only when the parent is. Very rarely you will find that the child is scared and the parents are not. But most cases it's like all of these things come from the parents or the primary caregiver, like you said. So that is very, very relatable. I think attachment styles can really help us with the trauma response, like you said, or even working with fears and phobias, because we'll know where what the deep rooted cause is for them to feel that way. Right. So moving on, I wanted to ask you, I mean, how do we identify, how does anybody identify if they're in a toxic relationship and not just a relationship where they've gotten comfortable?
Hmm. The first sign of a toxic relationship is when one, you feel like you're walking on eggshells. You feel like you have to modify whatever you are going to say based on how you think the person is going to react. See, we all do this to a certain extent in our regular lives as well. I mean, if the boss is in a good mood, I would go and pitch a new idea, and if he's in a crappy mood, I will probably avoid it for the next day. That's okay. But I'm saying, in a romantic relationship, or let's say in love relationship, in an intimate relationship, fear should have no place. If there is fear involved, and fear doesn't have to be the whole 100% crippling kind of fear, just the fact that, oh my god, like I can't say this to him because he's going to get very upset. This thought itself is an indicator of fear. So fear has no place. So if you have fear in your relationship, something is not right. And before I go ahead, I would also like to say that there is a difference between a toxic and an abusive relationship. Usually people use these terms interchangeably. You can, but then there are subtle differences. A toxic relationship can, like, two people can become toxic to each other because of the way they respond to each other. So the whole relationship or the equation can become toxic. In abuse, there is control involved, and there is a clear power equation where one person is an abuser and the other one is a victim. But a toxic relationship, both people can be toxic to each other. Like, both might be hurting each other, both might be causing pain to each other. So that's a very subtle difference that happens. And if you feel like your relationship is, something is not right, then first try and identify whether it has become toxic or it is an abusive one. Because in an abusive one, there would be only one person who would hold all the power. So, going back to my earlier point, yes, fear has no place. So, if you have a response which is prompted out of fear, then that's a sign. Second, if it is taking a toll on your self image or self esteem, if it is breaking your spirit, something is wrong. Uh, a relationship is supposed to be a nurturing space. Conflicts happen, yes, conflicts happen in all relationships, but conflicts are not supposed to break your spirit, nor are you supposed to be held accountable or blamed for everything that goes wrong in the relationship. So if that's happening, like, it's not like one person can have all the rights and one person can have all the responsibilities. That's not how it works. Yes, a relationship will not be 50-50 all the time, but then it will be a nice dance of, give and take. It has to be a nurturing space for both people. It has to be a safe space, most of all, for all people. So if it stops being a safe space, then you know that it is either toxic or abusive, and you need to stand up and take notice.
And when we talk about toxic relationships and abusive relationships, many people feel that they are working towards it, or they try to blame their partner for it, or blame themselves. Like you said in the beginning, that people tend to feel that they are the ones who need to be corrected, or the partner constantly feels the need to correct the other person, and one of them feels that no, there is nothing wrong with me. Sometimes I think both partners subconsciously, or I mean, they might not say it out in the open, but feel that there is something wrong with them, and it's the case with both partners. So what can they really do to feel differently? Or I would in fact first of all want to dive into what are the causes that this tends to happen. I mean, what are the red flags that a person should look out for initially when they're talking about these things, working in a relationship? What would be the initial red flags or things that they can avoid to let this entire process of toxicity in the relationship even begin? Where can they say hit pause and be like, no, this is when I have to change before things get worse? What would you suggest that people can take from here and apply it in their real relationships?
So, talking about red flags, I would talk about it in two stages. One, when you're just dating and you haven't really gotten into a committed relationship. A couple of red flags that you can try to spot. Or, okay, I wouldn't say try to spot, then you don't have to be vigilant about it all the time. But if it's happening, then you have to be alert. One is a very common tactic known as love bombing. Love bombing is when someone dates you, starts to date you, and literally showers you with all the love and attention in a very very short space of time. There's no pacing that happens when the dating is going on. There's no space given to each other. It's like suddenly they want to be a part of your life all the time. When we were having that discussion the other day, we were discussing that series You, right, Joe. That's love bombing. Like you want to be, you're there for this person all the time, and you will try to isolate them from their friends, in a way that to you it will seem like that time that, oh, he wants all the time with me, and that's wow, that makes me feel so special and wonderful. But what they're actually doing is isolating you from your support system for the long run. So love bombing is something that should really really be watched out for, because it never ends well. There has to be comfortable spacing and pacing when you start to date someone. It cannot go from 0 to 100 in like 3 days. That's not healthy.
But
So
I mean, I'm sorry, but I have this really thing in my mind which is here right now that, but that is exactly what I think so many people I know love. I mean, that is exactly what their expectations are. That is what they want out of a relationship, that my partner should constantly be there. If I call them, they should pick the phone up. If I'm texting them, they should reply. Okay, some people who've been in a relationship for a few months maybe, or maybe a few years, they probably they relax a bit and say that, okay, fine, if he's not texting right away, it's fine, probably he'll reply to me in, let's say, an hour or something, that's fine. But I do see that discomfort in their eyes, in their tone, or they're constantly checking their phone if the message has come or not. And where is their partner? So there is no comfort I see in people when it comes to these things. And sometimes it's gotten to the point where I've seen so many couples, even couples who come to me for therapy, this is an issue to them, that the partner is not responsive, and the partner is like, no, I am responsive. And a lot of things I wanted to ask you was, does this have to do with different genders or the gender stereotypes that we have? Because mostly when we talk about time, love and attention, it's mostly women who are asking for it. And of course they have their own reasons, which is correct on their part, and the men are usually not that affectionate. I mean, they show affection in different ways, but many a times the love language doesn't match with the other person. It tends to clash, that they do love their partner, they just don't know how to show it in a way that their partner can understand. That is a whole different thing. But when it comes to these things, like you said, that there should not be love bombing, which I think usually happens in the honeymoon phase, when the couple has just started dating and they want to shower them with gifts, spend all the time together, go out for weekends all the time, or any moment that they get to spend with their partner, they will just jump at that opportunity, cancel all their plans, and be like, no, today I want to spend this time with them. And it turns into such a thing that they don't even realize, and their life is slipping away. It does happen, and then eventually they regret it. And I have seen this on a personal level with so many people who are close to me also, that their life is slipping out. Now they're sitting and thinking that I don't have a social life, or I wish I did not leave out miss out on my friends or something. So then the regret sets in the couple. So I mean, how do they manage that? And since you've clearly mentioned, that these are things that should not happen, because these are clear red flags. But I don't know how many people would actually be able to apply this and agree with this, first of all. I mean,
you,
I can relate to it, I mean, how this affects it, but I don't know how many people would really be able to apply that, because
I
for
agree. I
me.
agree. You're right. I mean, a lot of people will not be able to apply. I keep hammering it into them, but then obviously a lot of them don't apply. But notice what you said. You said, if I reach out, I want my partner to be there. You are setting the boundary. You are reaching out for attention, and then you want it. This is different from somebody bombing you with attention, right? This person is hounding you the whole time. And honestly, I mean, that's what movies have taught you, that if a guy is really into you, he's going to hound you, right? That tells me, wow, he's really into me. No, he's only looking for a conquest. That's all he's looking for. Either it's obsessive or he's looking for a conquest. That's all. Because the moment you give in, shift, the equation is going to shift. All right. So love bombing, well, love bombing also has to be seen in triangulation with other factors, which are also red flags. For example, lack of empathy. So a lot of people who are manipulative are very good at saying the right things, but you will realize that they don't really feel those things. I mean, subtle things are going to tell you. And then at so what happens initially in a relationship is that you tend to disregard all of this. You tend to think that, oh, it's okay, this is just a small thing, it's fine, I'm sure he gets it, I'm sure he'll change, and all of those things. But like I have read this amazing quote the other day which said that if you're looking at the world through rose tinted glasses, the red flags are going to look like normal flags, right? So you have to be cautious, because in a new relationship your chemicals in your brain are going to make you do all kinds of things. See, that phase is important because that phase brings you closer and lets you explore a potential partner. It's an evolutionary thing, but there are so many pitfalls to watch out for. And a person's respect for space is like the most fundamental thing that can give you an indication of whether it's going to turn out healthy or not. So love bombing is one thing. The second thing is lack of empathy. Third thing is you watch out for their shift in personalities when they are in public and when they are in a private space with you. They are going to be very, very charming when out with other people, your friends. They will probably woo all your friends, and they will just be like this amazing person who's like the life of the party and everything. But in private, they can get angry at you. They can give you very, very toxic responses. And then the favorite statement of a toxic person is, I did this because you provoked me. This is like the biggest siren. Please run if you hear this. No thoughts allowed after this. I did this because you provoked me is like abuser 101. Okay.
But I mean, I agree with you, but when we hear these things, but I think it's way more common than um saying sorry to people. I mean, I don't think couples say sorry as much as they say, I did this because you did this. Sorry doesn't come out so naturally. It comes out like, तुमने ये किया तो मैंने इसलिए तो किया ना. Literally. And even when you see couples fight, that is I think the first thing that they say, or at least one of the first things that they say, that like an apology is probably something once they're cool and calm that probably some people say. But after a certain time in relationship, I think most of the people that I've seen say that you did this. Or with my friends, a certain common thing, like you said, the toxicity. I've seen the guy, like, and the example was so relatable that you said that they might seem like the life of the party, and they seem like people who are so cool to hang out with, and that's the impression me as a bystander, the third person in the relationship, seems like, oh my god, these people are so fun to hang out with. But when you really hear them at home, and you hear them fight, and the person is always like saying that, okay, I went out and I didn't give you time because you did this, because you were not giving me a clear answer. And I saw my friend saying this, and their partner was like, but I did not do this. There has been some misunderstanding because I was just at home. I was sleeping, so I didn't take your call. And the other person has just interpreted it as, that girl did not have time for me. She just
Yeah.
wanted to play games with me. And it was all in his head. It was completely in his head. And me, just as a third person knowing nothing about them, could clearly understand that this is clearly in that person's head. It is not
This is
something that she was
gaslighting.
playing games, and it's not the kind of person she is. She is, she's just a normal, innocent person, and she does tend to be a little lethargic, and, she tends to sleep out a lot. So, I mean, I was just surprised that the person felt that my friend was playing games, or she's trying to play with his mind or to get attention. So he went out and did something rash. And I was flabbergasted to that response. But I think that is way more common, I think, than saying sorry. Like, even in the end of their conversation, there was, or argument, I would say, there was no resolution. There was no I would say, apology that the person felt that they need to apologize to their partner, or any sense of feeling sorry about their actions. There was nothing. It was like, yeah, fine. So I did it. Why are you taking me so seriously? I did it. What's the big deal? We're just having fun. What's the problem? These things happen. So, like, the sense of, and I took it upon myself, and I thought that if I was in that guy's shoes, I would feel so terrible. What have I done? Maybe I might not express it right away, but at some point, definitely, I would want to say sorry, that, I did something so grave and that I've hurt my partner, because, you feel that you're losing trust from your partner if you do anything as small as even just lying about your whereabouts. It is a big deal. And so much so that it's not taken up as a big deal. And yet, I personally feel that it is a big deal, because you're lying about small things right now. How many things are you going to lie about them? And I see it happening every day in my life also. Everybody, like, lying to your partner or your boyfriend about where are you and where you're spending your time. And no matter how much I tell my friends that, dude, this is toxic, like, stop it, this is weird, you've been dating for a really long time, you tell him everything, or you tell her everything, what are you doing? And their usual response is, yaar, sab kuch thod na batana hota hai. I can't be telling her everything, or I can't be telling him everything. And I'm like, but you plan on living together. So if not now, when are you planning to do that? So I think, these are things that I think, now that you have put it out in the open, it's very important that, at least our listeners are able to learn the fact that these small things are what lead to bigger issues in the relationship. If you can't talk about something so much, like, about your whereabouts or what you're doing, or what your thoughts are, other things are, would be way more difficult to talk about between the couple.
This is exactly what I was talking about. That so many toxic behaviors are normalized. It is taken as granted that ये तो होता ही है, मतलब ऐसा तो होता ही है यार, मतलब इसमें क्या बड़ी बात है. This thing of um, denial of their partner's feelings. What the example that you quoted, that no, what you're thinking is wrong, or ऐसा नहीं हुआ था. This is not how it happened. It's in your head. You're making a big deal out of nothing. You don't deny your partner's reality. You acknowledge it at least and validate it. So, the apology point that you brought up, that's an amazing point. But ठीक है यार, चलो apology तक नहीं जाओ, but कम से कम एक mutual respect and curiosity तक तो you can go, no? You can at least try and see that, okay, I want to understand why this happened. And then if, yes, you establish that, okay, maybe I misinterpreted things, then you apologize. Then that's okay, that's healthy. But that doesn't happen.
And I think apology, like you said, right, it's a very later on stage that a person would apologize. But initially, there is no sense of acknowledgement about, what's right or wrong, or am I being able to understand the other person's perspective, or even hearing them out. You don't have to accept everything the other person brings to the table, but the least you can do is hear them out with an open mind. Maybe not in that heated moment, but eventually you think about it, take a moment, think about what they've said. Is it something that you usually notice in them? Like, is it a pattern that they always do this? And then you can probably talk to them about it. I mean, this is my personal opinion, that I believe, many a times you're not in the position to think about it in the moment, because it's such a heated conversation. You're too, muddled up in your own thoughts and perceptions, that you need to take your time out, and probably in a day or two, or probably in that during that evening time that you've gotten on your own, and you get time to think about these things, you have a sense of clarity. You know what you want and why you were really angry. Sometimes you're angry at something else, and we're taking it out on our partner in a different way, and just the smallest thing that they've done, we're shouting at them for that, and they don't even know why we're angry, right? So I think when we get that clarity, we must always, see what, at least acknowledge their feelings, and what they've done, why they've done, and try to resolve it in a mutual way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when we talk about relationships, is it practically, like we've spoken, possible to change the attitude, so that we can mend the toxic relationship? Can all relationships be mended, or does one have to finally take the step to exit that relationship?
There usually isn't a black and white answer to this kind of question, but in my observation of my 16 years of practice, Abusive relationships cannot be changed. If abuse is happening, please get out. There is no reason for you to bear it. There is no reason for you to tolerate it. There is no way that you are perpetrating it or provoking it or prompting it. Neither is it your fault, nor is it your responsibility to change the abuser. The responsibility of their actions lies with them. So walk away. If it's an abusive relationship, and please make very sure that it is an abusive relationship and not just a toxic, a mutually toxic equation. Uh, like, for example, any kind of violence, not acceptable at all. That's abusive, right? So abusive relationships don't change. Uh, Toxic ones, yes, there is a scope to change because toxic behaviors can be triggered by each other, at each other, directed at each other. Sometimes we act toxically in defensive ways. You know, uh, if there is something in my partner that triggers some kind of a past trauma in me, I will act defensive and I will probably act in ways which appears very toxic to the partner or which is very damaging to the partner or the relationship, and vice versa may happen. So, toxic relationships definitely have a scope to change, but they should always be attempted along with a professional, because when we are trapped in emotional cycles of our own, we don't have the capacity to think logically, nor do we have the tools to modify it. So, awareness tools, modification tools, a professional can give you. Get a third person in, a neutral objective party, and let them figure it out along with you and then work it out. So yes, then it can change.
And like you said, if some relationship is abusive, so when I was in during my college years, I was learning a lot about attachment styles, about relationships, different kind of relationships, and about abusive relationships. So when I was looking up domestic violence and why do women stay, see, I totally understand that we come from an urban setting and they come from a different setting. So just walking out of a marriage or divorce is a huge thing, even for people in this setting, however modern they claim to be. But when it comes to divorce or exiting any relationships, I think they're equally it breaks anybody down because it's such a huge step in anybody's life. As something as small as blocking a person seems such a huge task to do these days, and imagine leaving a person that you spend so much of time, so much of emotion, and I mean, you've shared so much of affection together, you've had so many memories together, so it's very tough for a person to exit that. But while reading up on these issues wherein domestic violence happens, not just in married couples, but in couples who are staying together, since live-in is legal in India, there are so many people I know who live in, and they have also gone through these things. And while reading up a few articles, I also saw many people posting on Quora. They were sharing their personal experience. So I was so stunned, I must say. Um, I mean, initially it was hard for me to take this in, but the matter of fact is that it does happen. Domestic violence does happen, and it's not just the woman being the victim. Many a times, men have also been the victim of these things. It could be emotionally abusive a relationship, and they've stayed in. And it's not like it's just the husband who's implicating physical violence. Also, many a times it's the partner also. Even during the pandemic, I one of the initial clients that I got, she also spoke about living in with her partner and going through so much of abuse, and she has internalized it and normalized it to the point wherein she feels that, yeah, of course he'll do it, right? Because even I did. And I mean, I don't know how, I don't have better words to put this in, but it got to the point wherein there were utensils being thrown, being hurt, and there was bleeding happening, and both the partners were bleeding, like, because they were throwing things and whatnot. And of course, when you're throwing fry pans and utensils at each other's head, of course you're gonna get hurt. So it got that bad, and there was so much of trauma. But she was talking about it as though it's something so normal, like, just abusing your partner, saying something rash. Like, there was no difference in the tone, no difference in facial expressions, because, and I was shocked to see that, because as a therapist, you tend to see that there should be some kind of modulation or some kind of change in the person's reaction. But it was internalized. She accepted it. She felt that this is normal. She still wanted to stay in the relationship and somehow figure out a way to, mend the relationship and move on with it somehow. And there was no value add. Personally, from my perspective, and I think eventually at the somewhere in the therapy sessions, we came to a point wherein she also saw that there is no value add that the person is doing. And she also, of course, had a lot of work to do. But I mean, I didn't see why she was having such a difficult, time leaving that relationship, because the first thing was that the violence part, of course. But like I said, even while I was researching and everything, I saw so many women saying that, yeah, abuse happens and then we work through it. But here, when we're talking about it, we're talking about exiting. If there is violence being there, just exit the relationship. There is not much to think about. But when we like we just spoke about mending relationships, so can this not be something that a behavioral change that can happen if the person is agreeing, of course? But does this really happen? I mean, everything sounds very well put when we theoretically or hypothetically are speaking about it. But is it something that, but if we talk about in reality, or if we put in the numbers, is this actually happening? Is this applicable?
What is the mending or
the
the
mending the
exiting?
mending or the fixing of relationships, because like I said, even on Quora I would read these articles, and I'll share this specific thing with you. This part was with my client and we've spoken about it a lot, and she's very open about these things. However, on Quora, what I read and I specifically remember was this couple was married, and the woman said that, yeah, my husband has slapped me and beat me up so many times, however I want to stay with my partner. Because eventually he learned, after many years he learned that it was bad and what he was doing was negative. So he worked through and we both put in a lot of effort, and again there was a time where again there was a lot of physical abuse, but now we are fine. Now I don't know how credible or reliable
I
this
doubt it. I
information is.
seriously doubt it.
Yeah,
That's not
see,
possible.
this is the thing. As a therapist or as a person looking from it from a practical angle, because we are not the person in the relationship, we are just a third person looking at the entire scenario. So we know that this is wrong, right? Like, we know that this is wrong and this is something that possibly cannot be mended. But we try our best as a therapist or as a third person to, try to help them in whatever way we can. But practically, since you are a relationship expert and you know how these things work and you have the most experience, I think 16 years is a lot to experience all kinds of clients, all kind of relationships. So I want to know that, is it really possible? And when we put these things down in numbers, how many people out of 10 you would say that would really change if there is abuse in the relationship? How many relationships can actually be mended? When we talk about toxic relationships and abusive relationships individually also, can these really be fixed in the long term? Or this is something that is obvious that, exiting is the best way out?
So, the example that you were giving earlier, where both people are throwing things at each other and injuring each other, and violence happening and all. This is one of the rare cases when there is mutual violence happening.
Mm-hmm.
If it's mutual violence happening, then probably it has so happened that their responding patterns have become toxic to each other, and it has escalated to a level where they're not able to control the aggression towards each other, and then just using each other as punching bags. This kind of a relationship has a scope because it's happening mutually. It's happening between the two people, unless one person is doing it in self-defense. That's a different thing. Somebody is hitting you and you are hitting back in self-defense. वो एक अलग बात है. And
Absolutely.
again, repeatedly so in a pattern. So this kind of a relationship has a scope still, scope where both people have to realize that both of them will need to put in effort and serious work into it, and things can shift or change. But when it comes to the control oriented abusive relationships, the power equations,
Mm.
where only one person is abusive and the other person is just taking it, no, change does not happen. Change does not happen because people who are abusive also are very low on empathy. They don't understand that what they are doing is wrong. How will you change someone when they don't even realize that what they're doing is not right? For change to happen, the awareness has to come in, know that I'm doing something wrong. So that's why change doesn't happen. There have been rare cases where uh, abusers have had this aha moment where they have realized that, oh, I'm probably doing something that was done to me, for example, right? In those rare moments, the moment that that clarity comes, then they want to work. That's the intention that is required. But if that intention does not come in, you can keep doing whatever you want, it's not going to change. There are people in abusive relationships, abusers for that matter, emotional ones especially, who have even gone to therapy with their partners just so that they can use this later to throw it in their faces and say, देखो तुम्हारे लिए तो I went to therapy also, did it work? No, it did not work, because the therapist wants to take your side, because the therapist is not fair, because this is wrong or that is wrong. It's not going to work. But see, I did it. So now that thing is logged for life that I did it. That becomes another weapon for emotionally gaslighting your partner. So yes, no, the abusive ones, they don't change. You ask me for a number out of 10, I would say in cases of toxic relationship where both there is a mutual triggering happen between the two partners and both are willing to work, maybe out of 10, 2 or 3 can change. But in an abusive one, I wouldn't even say 0.5.
Well, that brings things to perspective, really, because I was thinking that probably you would say something like 4 or 5 people in toxic relationships would change. At least I was hoping for a 50 chance, and then maybe even higher. I think because that's what every individual believes, that toxic
Yeah.
relationships can be mended. Even recently, somebody in my family, they were like, "Oh, you're a therapist. You would know that everything can be mended. Isn't that what your job is?" And of course, at the face of it, I could say a few lines to explain him what we really do. But the fact is that no matter how many conversations I have with them, I cannot control how they perceive what we are supposed to do and what their
That,
idea of a relationship is. Because in the Indian scenario, we try to fix everything. However, not thinking about how our individual health or mental health is affected in the process. How, if you're, even when we talk about parents marrying their daughters off, or their sons getting married, they don't care what kind of mental state their child is in. They think, let's get them married and they'll turn into responsible beings, or they'll just become so self-sufficient, or the wife will manage everything, or the husband will suddenly manage the finances for the woman, or something like that. They have these notions, and then when their marriage is not working out because they both are so emotionally frustrated, financially they're not stable, so their next step is, chalo, go and have a kid. Now all your problems will be solved. And
yeah.
initially I thought it's just, a few people who think like that. Now we're living in modern times. But the more I interact with people, and I see this in my family also, that there is this notion that yes, a child does fix everything. Marriage makes a person very matured, which being a therapist and studying about human behavior in general, or just by experience, so many people who just have life experience can tell you they don't need any formal education. It's just basic common sense. Nobody is going to change just because a new person has come, because the change happens from
Absolutely.
within. You change when you feel the need to change, when you get bored of and sick of what you are as a person are. It doesn't happen when somebody is giving you some, like you said, the aha moment happens with an individual, that they realize, oh, I am behaving like this because this is how I was treated, or because of XYZ experiences. It doesn't happen because the other person was nagging me for so long. And I mean, for me personally, when I understood that, probably I have this habit of not following up with people who are there with me. And then I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I mean, and then I thought that that's just the way my parents are. They don't like remember things that I say or follow up. So that's something that's inbuilt within me, that I don't have that habit of following up with people, even though I want to. Like, I want to, but I feel that, am I going to be overdoing it by asking them about their health, etc. So yes, I can like totally understand that. And then when we talk about these things, definitely, I think, toxicity does come from the family and our environment and all of these things. So moving
And
on,
I think,
I.
what you were
Mhm,
talking about earlier, na, ki
mhm.
women continue to stay in these, especially women, they continue to stay in these relationships because uske piche there are so many factors. Yes, on the surface of it, it looks like that financial independence could be one of the greatest factors because of which a woman would not break out of this. But you'll be surprised to know that successful women financially independent women are also more likely to stay longer in toxic relationships. And the reason for that is that they are so used to not giving up. They are so used to giving their best to everything that they do that even the relationship to them feels like something that they can fix, and they can't be a quitter here. And that makes them stay for a very, very long time. So financial independence, yes, is a very, very important factor, especially in our country, for a woman breaking out of a toxic or abusive relationship. But that's not the only factor. The biggest factor is the emotional investment. You think that I have invested so much that how can I just walk away? And this constant self-doubt that what if I am the one who's wrong? That's why I keep saying that get a therapist into the picture, get a neutral perspective, because it's highly possible. See, abuse doesn't happen overnight. It is very insidiously, manipulatively built into the relationship. So by the time actual violence has happened, you've probably been gaslighted into zero self-esteem already. So you can't think straight. You are going to end up believing that you can't do better than this person. Or, if you go out there, there are no better prospects for you, or you're good for nothing. You're not going to be able to make it on your own. These are the things that keep people in the relationship, not the other factors. Because I have seen people build empires from scratch. Women build empires from scratch after walking out of abusive relationships where finance was not a concern. They didn't have a penny and yet they managed it. It's this breaking of the spirit that keeps people in bad relationships most of the time.
I think this is what we were talking about the other day when we were discussing how when a person gets complacent in a relationship, the idea of moving on and starting afresh, the idea of dating again, dating a new person or a set of people eventually during that phase seems like such a huge task or a project to undertake that, oh my God, I'll have to go on dates, I'll have to meet new people. How are they going to be? Am I going to regret losing this relationship because of the time that I've invested? So many people have this fear that I've invested so much in this relationship, I can't just give it away. It seems like, we've bought something and now we have to keep it just because of what we paid. It does
Yeah.
seem like a transactional relationship instead of it being something about nurturing, about caring, about the love that is there. It doesn't remain like that. And you're very correct in saying that financially independent women also do that. No, and I have seen this everywhere. Like, it's not just the women. I mean, there is of course this notion that women who are not financially independent or women who come from different social stratas, they tend to cling on to a relationship because of these things. However, that is not the case. Financially independent women, I think, tend to stay in a relationship way more longer, not just because of the dependency but also because I think there is this thing wherein they say, especially in India, I've heard this a lot personally also, that if you are if you get educated too much, then you won't be able to adjust to your
Mm.
partner. You won't be able to, and then your thoughts are going to be aligned in a very different way, so you won't be able to adjust, and then you won't be marriage material. Basically, the underlying thing is that you won't be a good marriage material because you'll have your own thoughts and you can't adjust to a new family because that's what you're going to do, which
Huh,
again
and
is
can you
something.
imagine we are raised for codependency like this? You are raised to believe the whole time that unless you are able to make it with a partner, you're not worth anything. We are not raised to be self-sufficient human beings, happy human beings who can find another partner who can add to your happiness. No, you are raised to be someone who can go and fit herself into whatever slot is provided to her later on in the prospective partner's family or whatever. But then you have no worth as an individual. Like what you were just saying, that a lot of people think that who's going to start dating again, and kaun itna sara effort dalega and all of that. I'm saying the goal needs to be, first I need to get out of this toxic relationship. The goal doesn't need to be how will I find the next one. Then you're just repeating the pattern. You're going from frying pan into the fire. What is the point? You can be self sufficient, you can live your life without aching for a partner all the time. A partner is not supposed to fill voids inside of you, neither are you supposed to fill somebody else's voids. You are supposed to be whole yourself. You are supposed to find someone who's whole themselves, and then you create a new equation between the two of you. But finding the partner, finding one partner is not like the life's goal.
I think that is very well said, because I mean, even my example of, telling people that this is what it is, because once you're done. But these are the first thoughts that I think I would personally have had so many times, that how am I going to move on? I'll have to see so many new people. How is it going to be? And it's the same with so many people that I've seen, that there is this certain amount of regret that we have in our brain, that are we going to miss out on this relationship that we're in currently, and how is it going to be when we're out? Because we never think about being independent. We think, okay, fine, for certain
Yeah,
time, of course I'll be independent, of course I'll do that, I won't go straight out dating. But the main thing is of being alone, being lonesome. And also because I think, like you said, that women who are financially independent, we are raised to be codependent, and there is always this fear, especially in independent women, that they are told, अरे तुमसे नहीं हो पाएगा रिलेशनशिप, तुमसे
hmm.
नहीं हो पाएगा. So then we have to, there is this
Prove
just
it.
there is yeah, we have this need to prove it, that no, we have to prove
Yeah,
people wrong, that no, we could, we did this. Especially with women who have been in long term relationship, we have to prove it, that no, we can make this work, no,
absolutely.
we've done a great job. And because then there, it's like everybody's going to tell you all that time that you spent is going to be futile. So there is this rage also which comes, that no, I have to prove a point.
Yeah.
That is very well said on your part. So coming to therapy, as since you've had 16 years of experience, I was curious as to how do people or couples respond to a third person listening to their relationships. Are they reluctant, or is it normal for them? How is their reaction, and how can we remove a reluctant certain amount of reluctancy that any individual stepping into therapy has?
So the primary reluctance, I think, what I face in couples therapy is that people have this belief that if we are not able to work it out within ourselves, how will a stranger help us? How will a third person who knows nothing about us, who's not lived our lives, figure it out for us when we who are in it are not able to figure it out? Not realizing that when you're in the thick of something, especially when something is so emotionally invested, you lose your capability for logical thinking. Then you're only thinking from that part of your brain which is responsible for emotions. You're not thinking from your logical brain. It just goes out of the window, and you need a third party perspective to show you the mirror. You may be saying something to the partner which is extremely hurtful. In your head, you have the best intention. You are probably thinking that I'm transmitting the right message. But is the message being received the way you are intending it? Probably not. But who's going to tell you that? You are not going to be able to figure it out. Somebody who's watching you without having the emotional investment in this equation will be able to tell you that. That's what a therapist does. The other barrier that I find is that there is this very pervasive belief that therapy is the last resort. बिल्कुल डिवोर्स की नौबत आ गई है तो यार अब चलो ये भी ट्राई कर लो. you know this is the last thing, whereas this needs to be the first thing you need to try. Then you won't go through so much heartache, so much turmoil and conflict and friction. You can avoid it all. I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues. One of my younger colleagues, she recently got married, and uh, she was saying that when we got married, I moved to a new country and everything, and we had this suddenly this adjustment phase where it was like as if everything we were saying to each other was triggering for us. And I thought that we should have taken some kind of a like a marriage bridge course to help this transition happen. That's how I've designed my premarital coaching programs. That's what I've started educating people on, doing this with them, that when you before you get married, you go in with all your tools in place. Figure out who you are, where your values are aligned, how you are going to mm, resolve conflict when it comes. Then you're going in with solid ground. But people think that therapy is the last resort. अब बिल्कुल divorce बोल दिया है किसी ने, sign कर दिया है, तब फिर done, ठीक है यार चलो let's try this also, maybe it will work. It's like coming to the doctor at the fourth stage of cancer and telling them to save you. So yeah, I mean these are the major barriers.
I mean, that is again So true. Like therapy is considered the last resort. They think, what is a therapist gonna tell us? Are they gonna tell us something new? I mean, what are they? They're probably just gonna tell us some ways to resolve it. So that's definitely the last resort. Therapy definitely, I feel, is the last resort when people are like, okay, fine, nothing's working out. Finally, we need to get a third person's perspective. So they don't even look at us as a therapist, as a counselor. They look at us as a neutral friend or a individual who's just going to listen to their problems and give neutral things because they're paying us. So
Or
they,
give magic pills. Some magic
yeah,
mantras will give you
yeah.
कि हाँ बस ये कर लो अभी देखो overnight tomorrow when you wake up your relationship is going to be fit and fine and you're going to recover.
Yes, they
So that's
don't
a
get the point that it's a process of individual change and mutual understanding and acceptance towards everything that your partner does or what your behaviors are, and to actively change those things and adapt to those things. Definitely. So, what would be the most common problems that you find in married couples? I mean, other than what we have talked, is there other specific things that you find are common problems? And also, what does it look like to people, a basic therapy session when they attend a marital counseling or a couples counseling session? How does a usual session go? Because I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know what when they're entering a therapy room, how is it like?
That's I'm glad you're asking that. I'm sure that's going to help a lot of people. So first part of your question, common issues. The most common issues that I come across are infidelity, um, the some sort of loss of sexual intimacy. I also work as a sexual intimacy coach for a lot of people. So like let's say you've been married for 10 years and suddenly life has become very very mundane, and people say that we've kind of lost that spark, but we don't want to. I mean, we don't want to separate or anything. We are good together as a team, but we've just lost that, that passion between us. That's another very common issue that comes up. In-laws, in-laws is a great issue that comes up where the couple seems to be okay together, but then they are not able to deal with the whole family situation that's intervening on their privacy or their intimacy. um, yeah, I think primarily these are the three issues that mostly come up in couples. And what a couple sessions looks like, I can tell you about mine. I obviously cannot speak for other peers of mine. So for me, the first session usually is just about getting both the people in and just hearing their story, because so many times it happens that even in the first session, so I have them speak one by one as to why do you think you are here today. And when one person speaks, suddenly the other one's going to be like, oh, you never told me this, I didn't know that this was going through your mind. Like this happens in the last half an hour only, and then you know that okay, this is where the gap is. And suddenly they also realize that, oh, there is seriously a gap, because we thought that we are talking a lot with each other, but I had no idea. Because I think just the just by being in a different setting and talking to someone you've never talked to before about your relationship, you know puts a little perspective in your own mind when you start speaking about your story. So that really helps. I mean, that's my first step. And then after I've heard them out and based on everything that they have listed as points of conflict between them, based on that, my first step is always assessment. I always put them through extensive assessment of whatever it is that they're going through. If it's a communication issue, then their communication styles, their attachment patterns, their schemas, I do an extensive assessment on that. If it is a sexual intimacy issue, then we will do a extensive assessment regarding how they look at sex, what myths are they carrying, what is their view of pleasure, how do they see themselves, do they think they deserve pleasure, and how do they look at pleasure, things like that. So assessment is the second step, and based on assessment, whatever comes out, and then we start the actual work where we outline a plan of, let's say if it's communication, then we outline a plan of saying that okay, this is your style of communication, this is your style of communication, and here's how we can align the two and teach you better coping skills to respond to each other. And then the rest of the work is mostly practice, where we practice in session. She says something, he responds to it, and like I'll give you a very funny example. I was doing this with one couple once, and um, I asked the lady to talk about her first day at work, and I asked him to just listen and paraphrase. That's it. I told him, let's just listen to her, and everything she tells you, just give it to me in 4 or 5 lines. Just summarize it. That's all you have to do. So she went about and she said, oh, they had had a daughter recently, 3 months or something like that. So she started, yeah, I was really nervous about going to work. And then when I got to work, I couldn't stop thinking about my daughter. I was wondering what she's doing and this and that. And then I also started wondering whether he has called up home and checked on her or not. So I called him, and ऐसे करके she told the whole thing. So once she finished, and she was going about it very normally, like she was actually describing her day. And when I asked him to paraphrase, I said, okay, so now can you summarize for me what she did? He said, she's trying to say that I'm not a good father. She's thinking that I did what? Like, what is she thinking? Why will I not call up my home and check on my daughter? And I said, that was not the crux of the whole thing. And I mean, imagine in her whole description of the day, that's what he heard, which she didn't even say, but he heard it because that's what he was thinking. So this is how communication discrepancies come into life when you do exercises in couple sessions for communication like this.
Right, and I think all of us can relate to this as well because this is something that we all have done. Somebody is saying something and they've not even said something, but we've heard that. But everything else
Yeah.
that they wanted to communicate, we've just shut that out because we have a set of things that even when we're waiting for our partner to come back home, we already have this set conversation in our head that XYZ things they have done wrong. Now we have to tell them. Now they
So
have
true.
valid reasons to not do something. We don't even want to give it a thought. We just want to
Yeah.
bombard them with everything that we want to say. So definitely. So I believe with these assessments, like you said, this is how a relationship counselor or a marital expert can enhance the quality of relationships. Is there anything else that you would probably like to add on to, a counselor or a marital expert, the way they can enhance a relationship?
Yes, I really want to say this, that therapy, like I was saying earlier, is not just a treatment tool. It's not just something you do when things have gone out of hand. Couples therapy you can use to have a richer, better, more connected, and more intimate relationship also. None of us are perfect, and all of us are coming to marriages with our own blueprints. And there, I mean, you can at any given point of time you can learn who you are and do better. You can become better versions of yourself, and if you become better versions of yourself, you can absolutely have a better relationship. So maybe you're not having any problems right now, but who's to say you cannot have a totally rocking relationship better than this? A relationship which is so much more fulfilling than just existing from one day to another. The kind of relationship where you wake up every morning and you look at your partner, you're like, oh my god, like this is the person I want to be with. So a marital coach can absolutely help you with this as well. It can help you be more in touch with yourself, get more in touch with your partner, understand them better, and foster deeper intimacy than what you already have, which may already be good.
I think all of us would love to. I mean, who wouldn't love to have such a relationship where they would wake up to their partner lovingly and, I mean, I think reach the full potential of the relationship.
Absolutely.
That is, I think, the best thing that one can experience in any relationships. Also, since we're talking about mainly romantic relationships, I think, last question to you would be that when we think of toxic relationships, we only think of romantic ones. At least that's where the tendency comes. But there are so many relationships that can be toxic, or where our attachment styles tend to be um, very toxic, I would say. And there is a sense of insecurity in relationships, such as at work or with family or any caregiver or anybody in general. Any relationship can be toxic and affect our attachment styles also. So, what are your views on that?
I agree. So much of conversation around toxic relationships happens only with regards to a romantic relationship or a marriage. But a toxic relationship can be any relationship, between a parent and child, between two colleagues, between a boss and a subordinate, between two siblings. All of these, any relationship which is a relationship has the potential to become toxic, because toxicity has nothing to do with romantic feelings. Toxicity is basically, when we say toxin, what is it? It's like a poison, right? It's something that is causing you to have a bad reaction. ideally. Botulism is a disease caused by a toxin which gives you bad stomach ache. So it's like, I mean, in relationships also this thing happens. Something has creeped in which is unhealthy, which is leading you to have unhealthy reactions. So for example, in office you can have a toxic boss or a manager who is constantly on your back about everything, shooting you down for what the work that you do, telling you you're no good, and all of those things can happen, creating a very bad work environment. That's going to take a toll on your health. You can have siblings which are toxic, but unfortunately in our country, family is like supreme. So you're supposed to tolerate a lot of toxic behavior on in the name of ki, oh, it's just family. You don't find the heart to cut out these relationships from your life. And yes, I completely understand that so many times it's not possible to genuinely cut these people out, but it is definitely possible to set boundaries, and setting boundaries also takes a lot of practice, because we are not taught that. The whole time you are taught that the more selfless you are, the better person you are. So where is the concept of boundaries? Boundaries are looked down upon, but they are the healthiest thing that you can do. So yeah, toxicity can happen in all kinds of relationships, so you don't have to look at them only from a marital or a love relationship aspect. Any equation which is taking a toll on your mental health, on your self esteem, is toxic, and you need to take some steps.
Absolutely. And I think even when we talk about exiting relationships, it's not always the romantic ones, because people tend to think that blood relations are something that you have to stick by no matter what. They always use this term that I mean, heard so commonly, that, blood is thicker than water, so you can't be leaving your blood relations. But the fact is that it's probably something new to our Indian culture, but these are things that have been seen everywhere. It's not unique to the Western culture or any other country. It is there everywhere. Every individual can go through these things, and they should not feel that they are bound by family. If anybody in your family, or any person for that matter, that you come across who's so toxic, and you've tried to maintain your boundaries but it's still affecting your mental health, or your physical health of course gets affected when your mental health is being affected. So I think exiting, and when we talk about cutting ties over there, I mean, it's my personal opinion that it should not be taken as something very wrong that you've done, because at the end of the day you have to protect your boundaries, your well-being, and you are not supposed to be the selfless human with the endless energy and endless the selflessness, and giving your emotions out in the open, no matter how you really feel from the inside. Outside you have to look as this tough person. I think that never works out well, because we've all tried to do that and it does take a toll on us. It might not seem like that, but it does show up probably in our work life or somewhere else, or in our personal life. So I totally believe that is also very important. So now I think we've covered all questions, Prachi. So I was quite interested in what are the new projects that you're taking up, or anything new that you're taking up. That will be something interesting.
So I've recently launched this concept retreat known as the Diva Transformation Retreat, which is specifically designed for women. We held the first one in February this year. Thanks to the pandemic, we've not had another one, but hopefully soon again. It's probably going to happen twice a year, and we do this in Goa now, right now. It's like a 3-day residential retreat that happens for a group of women, where we live there, we live on a nice resort, and we do a lot of inner work. And it's basically, designed to heal from past trauma and to basically awaken your inner light that has become dimmed over the years. So we do a lot of intensive work, assessments, worksheets, exercises, group work over 3 days. And this is my latest project. My other projects are, like I was mentioning, there is a premarital coaching program that I'm doing, helping couples walk into a marriage with stronger tools, better tools. And then I'm also working on a mindful dating program, where people who are stepping into dating lives at whatever age, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, second innings, whatever it is, people who are stepping into a dating life can do it with a lot of self awareness, understanding of what it is that they are looking for in a partner, and make the dating process more aligned to what they're actually looking for, rather than just going by a trial and error process, how we usually are used to going about dating. So yeah, these are my top three projects right now.
That sounds wonderful, especially the retreat idea of, taking 3 days out away from your normal environment. That sounds very fascinating.
Oh,
And
it's beautiful.
even,
It does amazing.
I mean, I feel excited. Like, I feel like going on a retreat and learning more about myself. So I'm sure everybody listening to this would also be really happy to see how it turns out and how everything is. So yeah, both your projects sound really, really amazing that way. So we've come to the end of the podcast. It was a pleasure having you over, and I have learned a lot from just talking to you. And I think there has been a lot of self learning that anybody who's going to listen to this are going to open their eyes to and understand what toxic relationships are and what abusive relationships are, because usually they thought of as synonymous, that there is no difference. If it's abusive, it's toxic, that's it. So the subtle differences are not quite commonly spoken about, and many other things. I think about exiting relationships, when not, the red flags, everything has just been so wonderful to learn about, and it will definitely help all of us in our lives. So thank you so much for enlightening us about the entire subject in such a short time. Thank
Thank
you
you so much
so
for
much.
having me here. It was wonderful talking to you. I love the way you think about these things, and I think you are a really uh, how should I say, a really competent therapist in the making. And I really cannot wait to find out all the work that you're going to do for the rest of your life. So keep
That
doing it.
is that is so kind of you to say. I mean, there is so much that I still have to learn from you. I believe there's so much. You're so enlightening as a person. It's always a pleasure speaking to you. So thank you so much for coming, and I hope we can do another such session soon. We
Sure,
everybody would love to hear from you again.
absolutely.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. If you like the content, please hit the like button and feel free to share this video with your friends and family. For more such content, please subscribe to our channel and follow us on Instagram. Our handle is neurobloom.india. You can also book your therapy session with us by giving us a call at 9999208361 or visit our website www.neurobloom.info. See you in the next video.